Well, we've been in a series called Enough. We're learning to say enough. Enough to stress. Enough to debt. Enough to all the things that is just squeezing the life out of our hearts. We've been examining for a few weeks now God's wisdom concerning contentment and finances. Now, let me be clear in the beginning that God has given us good things to enjoy. God is not anti-stuff. God is not anti-wealth. That just isn't His nature. But often throughout the Scripture, He talks an awful lot about our relationship to material stuff. The general wisdom of Scripture is to enjoy the things that I have given to you and allowed you to possess. Enjoy those things. Just don't worship them. Don't get obsessed by them. Don't let them get out of kilter in your value system. Now, around 20 years ago in American culture, there was a change in the way we look at our finances. Up until that time, sociologists would, for the most part, agree that Americans can pretty much live by God's general instructions regarding material goods and their finances. But around 20 years ago, that began to change. In essence, we as a culture said, you know what, God, we understand your general rule about how to manage our resources and deal with material goods, but we're going to set that aside. We're going to just kind of kick that to the curb. We think we know a better way of handling our material goods, and we're just going to kind of do it our way. Or we're going to ignore your authority over how to respond to material things, and we're just going to do it our way. Now let me build that case for just a second, because this has a lot of relevance to this little talk this morning. Few people would disagree that over the last 20 years especially, America has degenerated into a nation of consumers. Our whole perspective on material goods has changed. And it has created pain and chaos in our culture, the likes of which none of us have ever seen in our lifetime. Now, for example, up till about 20 years ago, most people lived within their means. They really did. There was a margin between their income and their expenditures. Up until about 20 years ago, almost everyone who bought a home put about 20% down on that home. It was common for young adults to work 5 or 10 years to save up resources to invest in a home. Up until about 20 years ago, most people bought cars that they could afford. Up until about 20 years ago, most people paid off their credit cards about every 30 days. That no longer is the case. The current credit card debt average is about $8,500. So that means if we didn't put another dollar on that card and just paid the minimum payment, it would take 14 years to pay off that credit card debt. Up until about 20 years ago, people set aside a portion of their resources for savings and retirement, and many people gave generously to benevolent causes and charitable organizations, including churches. There was just a spirit of generosity that was pretty common in America. Now, despite the clear teaching of Scripture, today, most of us are not living within our means. We used to save about 11% on average, Americans did. In 2006, that dropped to 1%. And today, for many people, our savings is a negative number. We're living beyond our means, and we're drawing from all available resources to maintain the lifestyle we've created. Now, that isn't true across the world. In the Netherlands, for example, the average amount of savings per person is 7%. In France, it's 12%. In China, it's 22%. So it can be done. But the point is here, just to introduce this talk, that millions of Americans have cultivated this unhealthy relationship with consumer goods. Now, it's not an unhealthy relationship with money. If it were an unhealthy relationship with money, we'd gather it, we'd hoard it, we wouldn't release it, we wouldn't let go of it. It's an unhealthy relationship with consumer goods. And as a result, it's destroying many of our lives and families. So in this series, we've just been asking, what happened to us? What made us pull away from God's clear teaching on how to use our resources and our relationship to material goods? Why have we done that? So we've been calling ourselves just to say enough. It's time to say enough. Now here's just a brief recap of what we've done the last month. The first part of this series, the big idea of that day was simply that God's current provision for my life is enough. Would you just say that phrase out loud with me? Just read it on the screen. God's current provision for my life is enough. We looked at a key scripture passage that day from Philippians chapter 4, where the Apostle Paul said, I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do everything through Him who gives me strength. So Philippians 4 that we looked at in that first message, it encouraged us to do something more with our money than just acquire stuff. We don't need more stuff. We need the truth of Philippians 4. God's current provision for my life is enough. I read a poll recently that was taken in America, and Americans were asked, what is your favorite recreational activity? And the choices they were given included golf, cycling, walking, jogging, tennis, etc. Of all the recreational activities available to us, Americans said the thing they like best to do is shopping. Come on, shopping. 34% of Americans said that was their favorite recreational activity. In the second part of this series, the big idea of that really was life and the accumulation of stuff is not our ultimate goal. The thought was we need to invest in the right market. We asked the question that day, what did the smartest person in the world, namely Jesus Christ, have to say about money? We answered that by looking at a passage in Luke chapter 12. Jesus was in dialogue with a rich young ruler in that passage. And this guy had a lot of resources, and he had an unusual windfall. So his response was to build bigger barns, bigger silos, and just gather all the stuff and hold it real tight. It would be roughly equivalent to me having a windfall and buying a nice condo at the beach or building that nice lake house that I would like to have, just spending it all on just myself. So Jesus shocks this guy by saying, today your life will be required of you. So he learned that lesson that we can't take with us the resources that we accumulate. Now, after he taught and gave that little parable, then he turned to his disciples and said this, therefore I tell you, don't worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. Life is more than food, and the body more than clothes. Consider the ravens, they do not sow or reap, they have no storeroom or barn, yet God feeds them. And how much more valuable are you than the birds? That day we used the Monopoly example, where the key strategy in winning the game of Monopoly is acquisition. To be successful, it just takes a total commitment to acquisition. You got to acquire every property or utility that you land on. And when the game is over, we fold up that Milton Bradley board and all those beautiful red hotels and green houses. They go right to the crease and go right back to the box, right? Well, that's basically what God told this rich young ruler. At the end of the day, when the game is over, all that wonderful money, all those wonderful things you've accumulated, it just all goes back in the box. And in the third part of this series, the big thought of the day there was being challenged us to be core givers. God has touched us at our core, and we're moved from our core to give. A core giver is someone who just is generous and they give as a part of who they are. It's not the giver that just gives as an add-on or sporadically or